First of all, my name is Gerald Neal, and as you know, and for those who do not know, I am the Kentucky State Senator for the 33rd Senatorial District, which you are now sitting in, and I want to welcome you all to the district. What is exciting, though, is the fact that we've had this opportunity to come together today to deal with very important subject matter as it relates to economic development and community empowerment, because they both go hand in hand, no question about it. We're fortunate today to have with us our very own leader, our very own mayor, Mayor Greg Fischer. Now, everybody in here knows Mayor Greg Fischer. Give him a hand.
Thank you for that.
Everybody here knows Mayor Greg Fischer. I like to joke with him about, I can't go any place and I don't see you there. I mean, this mayor is everywhere. What's that about? Well, I got to tell you, it does show us one thing. We got a hands-on mayor that it reaches out, and he reaches out aggressively. So I think just that is important. I think the second thing, Mayor, is the fact that he has gotten national recognition, brought national recognition to our city through his movement of compassion. And you couple that with his reaching out for unity in terms of the community, I think it's very important. I think he deserves a hand for that. Yeah. I'm particularly interested in this unity piece because, as the mayor and I have talked about on numerous occasions, the only way you can really get something done is when you come together, agree on what you're going to operate on, and then execute. And it takes a unified community, and I think it takes a sensitive and compassionate community in order to do that. So we're poised to do great things. So I'm delighted here to welcome Mayor Greg Fischer to this segment of the Economic Development Summit of AAI. And we're going to have a conversation with the mayor, and we're going to talk about economic development. So I'm going to start like this. Could you give us your view of how you see your role as the mayor of Louisville?
Well, first, thanks everybody for taking the time to come out here today and spend a good part of the day focused on a super critical issue for the success of our city. So thank you, and Senator, thank you for inviting me and your leadership with AAI and pulling all this together. So what my role is for the community, it should be, like, remember, I'm a business guy that just happens to be mayor, so I feel like you're doing your job when the human potential of every one of our citizens is thriving and flourishing. And that's easy to say, and that's how we define our city value of compassion, by the way. And in a city our size, we have about 770,000 people or so. There's a lot of folks that don't need any help, but then there's a lot of folks that do need help as well. So how do we cater our services here in our city on both the public side and private side so that people, in fact, get those services? So at the end of the day, if everybody was walking around with their human potential flourishing, we'd be in a really good place. And I suppose the rest of what we're going to be doing today is talking about how to do that.
Well, that's right. In fact, that's what we've been doing, but we got to continue the discussion. But, you know, you're talking about pulling people together, but it takes resources to do that, doesn't it? How do you marshal those resources? How do you see that? Because you got to make some hard decisions, I would.
Yeah, well, the city has a budget. Our general fund budget's around $700 million. Our all-in budget's about $1 billion or so. Over 50% of that goes to public safety. The school district obviously is separate from our general fund budget. That's over $1 billion budget in JCPS going toward our education. At the end of the day, and a lot of y'all have heard this, I mean, what solves all the problems is education. And when we think about some of the challenges in different parts of our community, you can almost overlay the percentage of adults with college degree to income, to health outcomes, to safety issues, et cetera. So achieving that educational degree, whether it's high school or college degree, is super important. Addressing the achievement gaps in education between the majority population and the minority populations is super critical as it relates to equal outcomes and equal access for our community as well. And the city, frankly, doesn't have a lot of money as it relates to education. Now, we are responsible for a lot of out-of-school time activity. When you look at the difference between what I would call advantaged kids, and that doesn't matter what their skin color is, advantaged kids come from families that have a loving, supportive environment and the ability to stimulate their children intellectually, either through paid out-of-school time activities or within the home. So you've got that group of kids. And then you have kids that are disadvantaged, that may have a very tough family and housing or home situation and no out-of-school time activity. The gap between those two areas is huge. And more than ever in our country, the zip code that you're born into is very often a determinant of how your life is going to turn out for you. And that obviously is against all the American ideals that we were grown up to believe in. And you see that's a big part of the debate, or it should be a big part of the debate that's happening in the country right now in terms of lack of social mobility, your ability to move through a community, move throughout the country because of skills that you have. That's less and less possible. We're not having that debate in Washington, D.C. right now because we're very polarized, but it is a critical issue for people to have hope. When we take a look at some areas of our town, thankfully not a whole lot, but when we see other cities and we see riots in the streets, what might be Ferguson or Baltimore, people ask, why is this happening? It's irrational to burn down your own city. But when you're hopeless and you feel disconnected and you have no future, for some people, there's nothing left to do. So that, of course, is something that we have to fight to make sure that doesn't happen in our community, and we do that through a feeling of interdependence. We do that through out-of-school time, in-school time, do that through summer works. We do that through mentoring activity, safe and healthy neighborhoods, et cetera. So at the end of the day, and obviously one of the themes of the last session was we're all in this together. This is a contact sport in terms of building a city together. And anybody that's sitting on the sidelines is part of the problem, not part of the solution. You guys are in the contact sport here today. I appreciate you being here. So I know I'm speaking at a very high level here and not very solutions oriented. I'm not sure what you're looking for there.
Don't worry, we're going to bring it down to the ground.
Okay, good.
Back to the budget.
Yeah.
You got a metro council that allocates resources to city government, and you as mayor have to take those resources, which are limited in many respects. I face the same thing on the state level, limited funds, and you have to make decisions about how that's going to be allocated. There are 26 representatives on Metro Council, so they have to do their thing because they are all looking at not only the whole city, but each part of the city they represent. But when that comes to you, what's that process of how you make decisions about how those funds are allocated? Who gets what, when, where, and how?
So we're in the middle of our budget process right now. The city budget runs July 1st is when the fiscal year starts. The biggest responsibility of any elected official, obviously, is public safety. As I mentioned earlier, about 56–60% of our budget goes toward public safety, so that's police, fire, EMS, and that's a pretty solid number. So before you even start, the biggest chunk of your budget is taken up. Then we get into areas like, picking up the trash and recycling. Our solid waste has got our public works has got a good size of the budget. Corrections, we're responsible for corrections in our city as well. That's about a $50 million budget. So you start chewing away at this thing, and all of a sudden, at the state level, you guys have got about a $10 billion budget a year. You're like, there's surprisingly a little amount of money left to then say, what else do we need in the community? The community's telling us loud and clear right now, for instance, that they want more roads paved. Okay, so how do you make a decision between paving roads, an immediate need, or giving more access to community centers for children without a school time? Some would argue is paving a way to a brighter future. So those are the kind of things that we're always having to wrestle and see, how to pull this thing together. We then propose a budget to the Metro Council. We negotiate back and forth on what the final budget is, and then they pass it.
The reason why I raise that question is that, I find that many people that contact me and other legislators on the state level, that they get confused that the role between what happens on the local level and the state level, and they get confused over what's available to actually deal with certain types of things that they would request to be done. So I'm really focusing on the limit capacity and what's done with what is left in terms of doing it. For instance, what do you do about housing? What's the city's ability to deal with housing? I know in the West there's a lot of housing that's been abandoned, boarded up, and so forth, and it's a sore thumb to a lot of people. How is that addressed, and how does that affect what we do on the state level? Or how's what we do on the state level affects what you do?
So that's a great example where we can drill down in the budget and see how the process works. Affordable housing, big challenge for the community. We have the need for about, I think it's 45,000 more housing units in our community. And we don't have a dedicated fund for affordable housing. That's a problem. To jumpstart the process last year, we put $14 million in our budget, which was for affordable housing, which was the largest infusion for affordable housing that we were able to find in the history of our city. That's a down payment on what needs to happen. It's about 5% of the total need. So what needs to happen is for us to develop a replenishing affordable housing trust fund for the city with a dedicated revenue source so that year in and year out, we can start chipping away at this 45,000 units. For that to happen, from a community standpoint, we frankly need enough votes from the Metro Council to dedicate a fund for affordable housing. So when you get into that conversation, here we go into trade-offs again. People say, okay, well, let's say that we have $4 million a year going toward affordable housing. Then the council person from across the street says, I need that for more out-of-school time in my community. Why don't we have universal pre-K in Louisville? Because if we know we're putting all of our kids in the universal pre-K for kindergarten, they're going to arrive and we'll be able to address that 3-year gap between disadvantaged and advantaged kids, and that really is the long-term solution for that. Then we have the person on the other side of town that says, we need more policemen. I'm concerned about the homicide rate in our city, so we need to put more street on the feet. So all of a sudden, these things that seem kind of simple, you know, to a lot of folks, when you say this is a no-brainer to have more affordable housing and look at the jobs it would create, there's arguments behind each and every one of these, and that's where it comes to kind of making the sausage of a budget or legislation. When you take a look at what the role of the state is, or the federal government's very involved with this. Obviously, we heard from Tim Berry in the last panel. We have a great housing authority here in our city. They administer our funds that we get from Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. We have community development block grants, money that goes to parts of the community that have more needs from an economic standpoint. So we have a big partner with the federal government. State government, not so much, especially when it compares to the federal government. So the question of like what can be done from the state is that would be great if you guys could help us afford or have some affordable housing down here. Well, in this current budget we have, obviously there's a different perspective that's being argued about in Frankfurt right now with a really pretty austere cuts. Affordable housing in that dialogue probably would be seen as a luxury to some folks. People don't understand what I call the high cost of being poor. People don't understand the challenges of poverty. Now you do if you're in poverty, or hopefully you've done if you've tried to expose yourself to the challenges of poverty, but there's a lot of moralizing from folks about folks that have low income or disadvantage. Just need to work harder, need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. These type of platitudes that are really aggravating to folks that, have spent some time in the trenches to say, well, you try pulling yourself up by your bootstraps when you don't even have any damn boots, And so, until we kind of come to that realization, and look, it's nobody's fault either. We're living in this age where everybody wants to blame somebody for something. It's the immigrants' faults, it's the Muslims' faults, it's the poor people's faults, it's the Trump supporters' faults. We got to get past that to say we've got a common agenda we have to work on here and get back to where we can make decisions center right, center left, and move forward. So I'm a little bit of a tangent there, but I bring that up in the context of the state budget, you know, that is very austere right now because of decisions that have been made over the decades, and we got a big pension hole that we want to fill. But we have a real aversion to raising revenue at the state level now, which means we've got to cut expenses. And when you cut expenses, the state budget's not that different from the city budget, and that at the end of the day, what you're usually cutting is you're cutting people, and you're cutting people that give services. And you're cutting services a lot of time that are sorely needed by who? People that are poor. So who gets the shaft once again? Folks at low income. And if you don't believe that, jump up and look at kind of the macroeconomic situation that the country is in right now. And people rightly say our middle class is shrinking, our working poor is growing, the people in poverty are growing. And so when we talk about West Louisville, we talk about the median income in West Louisville being around $24,000 versus a citywide average of around $46,000. And then as Kevin Fields rightly pointed out in the last panel, that 22 in West Louisville will be about 1/3 of what's in the east part of the town. Not good, not bad, facts. How do we come to grapple with those facts? At the end of them, why is there higher income on the east side? Well, our percentage of college education our adult percentage of college education on the east side of our town, probably, I don't have the exact statistics, but in the 55 to 60% range. What's our percentage of college education on the west side of town? Anybody know? 8%. Okay? So I go back to education again. What's happened with the west side? You know, our population has really been declining since automobiles were invented and people said, I don't have to live so closely to where I work. Then the flood of 1937 came along. Then desegregation came along. So you could live anywhere that you wanted to. So this has been a slow drip in West Louisville that we now see manifested, let's say, in vacant and abandoned properties that were accelerated by the recession.
Well, I think it raises a very interesting point. You keep using the term, and I agree, that the solutions are going to be long-term. Education is a long-term process. Housing is a long-term process. But what is it that can be done in the short term? Yeah. What is it that we can see? What is it that people in the community can point to and say there's progress? Yeah.
Well, because the last thing they want to hear is, look, this is a 15, 20-year solution, and trust me, we'll get through it. It's like, I've heard that before, okay, like many times, especially from people that look like me, you know, and there's not a lot of trust. I get that. So then let's take a look at short-term things. People have to see visible signs of progress. You're starting to see those in the city right now because, remember, we had this big recession. In the case of, and I'll just measure it in the terms I've been in office, the first 2.5 years that we were in, we were fighting to come out of the recession, fix a structurally imbalanced budget. We did that. Now you're starting to see some really promising announcements for the city. Google Fiber, the Omni Hotel, the Walmart at 18th and Broadway, which we can talk about separately, the food port. These projects have been 2-3 years in the making. And as you know, through government and all this public-private nonprofit stuff, it takes a while to get these things done. So the question is now, when we come to West Louisville, what can we see? This week was a big week for the food port because the memorandum of agreement was signed, the development agreement, the deed was passed, which allows them to start financing the project in a way that needs to be done. $56 million project, Russell neighborhood, 200 full-time jobs, community council with input on the development of that. Most of the jobs will be surfaced by the people from the neighborhood. So you should say, well, within a year, we should be seeing dirt being turned, construction on that project. 18th and Broadway, you know, we've got Walmart on the west side, we've got the YMCA on the east side of 18th Street. Walmart's being held up because a small group of our citizens don't think it should be there with its current design. Hopefully that will be resolved by the circuit court or by the appeals court in the next 6 to 12 months, but it's being held up by that.
Let me ask you a question about that. Is there anything else that's holding up the Walmart project other than that lawsuit?
No, Walmart theoretically could start the project right now, but their policy, and I think we would all agree, is until this land is free and clear of any kind of risk, we're not going to start developing the property because we could lose. And so they're waiting for it to be, for that case to be solved or resolved, and I think it will be favorably toward the development as it is right now. That was a development that that was a process that we worked on for about 6 to 9 months with Walmart, negotiating this, negotiating that, and we finally agreed that we were as far as we could get with them without them walking away. The problem is if you push too hard and they walk away, we don't have other people lined up behind them saying, we'll develop the property next. So we've got to be realistic about how we're doing this. So our risk when we go into these cases where legal challenges are filed against projects like this, you have risk of what happens if the country goes into a recession. We saw about 2 months ago Walmart decided to close 200, 300 properties around the country. They've said they're full steam ahead. But as we know in public companies, those type of decisions can change from time to time. So time is not our friend on this particular issue. Time usually is your enemy on any kind of development deals. But anyway, we should see that hopefully within the next year in terms of it starting. The YMCA needs to put their financing package together on right across from Walmart on 18th Street. So you could see right now what currently is a desolate kind of wasteland is going to turn into a burgeoning retail center and lifestyle center with the Y and other projects on the east here in the relatively near future, 2 to 3 years. Waterfront Park West, or Waterfront Park is moving west from 10th Street to 15th Street, so the vision is to have as much of Waterfront Park moving west and circling the city as possible. That'll be about a $35, $40 million project. That's been announced. Fundraising for that should start within the next 6 months. Somehow the state needs to come up with some money. The city needs to come up with the money, and the rest will be raised from philanthropically. Chef Space is already open. If you haven't been by and checked that out, I would encourage you to do that. That's right off 18th and Ali in the old Jay's space. And then the big project is the whole Choice Neighborhood planning grant that's taking place in Russell right now.
Now that's really exciting.
Well, and so we're going to have a moment of truth here before the year is over. And that is, one, I think our planning process has been unparalleled, and we hear that from HUD as well. We've had over 500 people from the community participate in the planning process. The difference between the Hope 6, which is now gone from the federal menu, and Choice Neighborhood is more of a holistic approach toward community, not just mixed income, but services, schools, healthcare, etc. And the reason why I say it's a moment of truth before the year is over is the Obama administration will have some money that they will be rewarding to a few cities that will be the seed capital to spur the other investment in the project. And again, I think, Kevin, you spoke about that earlier. So think about Park Duval, think about Shepherd Square, Liberty Green, in terms of how they've been redeveloped over the past several years into mixed income communities. This is what we hope and pray is going to happen in Russell. Now, once the Obama administration leaves, then we're going to have to see who the next administration is in terms of what their beliefs are in projects like this. A betting person would say that Hillary Clinton will be our next president. I don't know what you think about that. So she believes in HUD, or she believes in these type of projects. If Donald Trump is the president, I don't know what's going to happen to our country. But he's a developer. Maybe he'll build stuff around the country, you know. So the point is, I'm not for Donald Trump. You can probably tell that. The point is that by the end of the year, hopefully, what we'll hear back from the White House is, you know, here's a $20 or $30 million grant to jumpstart the Russell neighborhood, and then we can put the rest of the project together just like we've proven we could do with these 3 other projects we spoke about. So it's an exciting time.
Well, there's a lot of issues embedded in what you just said. But one thing I think bears maybe some clarification is, what does the city, I mean, the vision thing is your thing. You give the vision for our community. You're our leader, and you try to put that into actuality through per the discussion you've had. But But what is it that you think the state can do, that you think reasonably the state can do, or you wish the state could do, in order to do what you have to do to make these things real on the ground in the city of Louisville and the West End?
Yeah. The big challenge you see in states like Kentucky, and you saw it in North Carolina this week as well, is that, and Georgia's the same issues happening there, is that you have states with good-sized cities in them, but the state legislature is dominated by rural legislators. So we don't have the votes in the metropolitan areas to really dictate the way the budget should be developed. Now, I mentioned that in that as our city, we generate about $2.5 billion worth of tax receipts a year, but we have a very centralized economy in Kentucky. So that money goes to Frankfurt, and then Frankfurt redistributes it around the state. And so we get back about half of what we generate. Now, Kentucky as a state, we get money from D.C., so we understand that's part of our role. So we have to fight for each and every dollar we get that comes to Louisville from Frankfurt, even though we're the economic development engine of the state. And naturally, my pitch to them up there is the more you give us, the more we're going to generate, which is good for the state. And some folks can't make that leap of faith or logic, depending on how you look on it. So, critical issues from the state for us. Let's say we want to expand River Road west to facilitate waterfront park development. Lots of road funds in pretty good shape. That's an area where we need help with roads. You know, Dixie Highway, continuing the remake of that. So I think that's going to work out.
$18 million into that, bringing it up to Broadway all the way from Shively.
So, yeah, that's going to work out pretty well, I think. So on the road side, we're looking pretty good. On big projects, like when we talk about this 9th Street divide and reimagining that, that's a huge infrastructure, very costly project that we're trying to figure out what to do with that. From a policy standpoint, we would love to see incentives for companies to locate in low-income census tracts. Okay, so tax forgiveness, tax credits, et cetera. Because one of the things we're talking about is it's a chicken and egg deal. It's like, okay, well, I'm thinking about moving to the west, but they don't have the services that I'm used to having, let's say, around Hikes Point. Okay, so like the Walmart deal, there's an incentive for them to locate there. So what can be done on the state side for low-income census tracts, which would not only benefit the urban areas, obviously, but would also benefit the rural areas. You know, the challenges that we have are magnified now when you go to eastern Kentucky and see what's happening in coal country out there. So these type of policies could benefit all areas that we're talking about.
You may be happy to know on that note that a discussion is, and you probably already know this, is being had between your administration and myself on the state level and state officials about that very subject matter. You know, but what I see is a drawback in the incentive area is that part of it's a mindset. We see it as an investment, and they see it as a drain on the general fund. But also, there's a lack of creativity there. One of the things that we're discussing is not only incentivizing in the way that companies can get points in terms of the traditional model, but also additional points if they're also making relationships with community organizations or some particular local initiative, et cetera. And I think there's some discussion, there's an opening there.
Well, and so the food port's a good example of that. Yeah. We have an opportunity. See, the food port is not affordable if it was just all private money that went into it, because the project would be too expensive, nobody would be able to locate there, there wouldn't be jobs that would be hired there. So this is a combined effort between a nonprofit developer, that's Kentucky Seed Capital, money from the city. It looks like some money from the state, which would be very positive, showing that they care about West Louisville, and then federal tax credit money as well. So that's an example of how we can do something. Now, a dream, just so I can add it to the list for you, is the states I think that are going to really be moving ahead are states, and there's a couple out there right now, that offer universal, high-quality pre-K for their kids, because they recognize that it is not sustainable for us as a country, to repeat myself, for some kids to show up 3 years behind at the age of 6 at kindergarten, because only about 10% of those kids catch up. So universal pre-K, so we get everybody ready to learn, and then also some type of incentivized or free grade 13 or 14 so that everybody has a pathway to a skill. Okay, everybody's going to make different choices in your life, but we as a society, I think, should say, if you're a good citizen, your family unit, whatever it is, you pay your taxes, may not be high, may not be low, but you've got a pathway to have a skill that can sustain you through your life. Our educational system does not allow that right now. And this is not controversial. You go to many countries in Europe, this is just standard way they do business because they understand you have to have a skill. And why so many people are being left behind in this economic transition we're in right now is the world economy is changing faster than people's ability to adapt. And so we have to relook at the way that we educate and we care for all of our citizens. So this is something that I believe is a good investment because everybody's heard this before. We're more than happy to pay $25,000 to incarcerate somebody that didn't have good, high-quality universal pre-K, didn't have a sound family environment, so we just lock them up, and we lead the world in that. That money, if you invest it early in a child's life, people say the return on investment is 5 to 1, 7 to 1. But that requires creativity, right, and courage, supposedly courage from some people who say, we're going to try something different here. We've already seen in Louisville with some of our kindergarten boot camp programs from last summer, in as little as 6 weeks, we're seeing children from distressed areas go from 47% readiness for kindergarten to 75%. In 6 weeks, it costs about $1,000 each. These kids now got a shot. Without that, we don't. So to me, that's a good risk to take.
As it relates to economic development again, though, back to this vision thing. What is your vision for Louisville? But more specifically, what is your vision for the West?
Well, when you think about, I mean, what is the #1 advantage of the West? Location, okay? You know, what's the #1 rule of real estate? Location, location, location. Fortunately, you know, what we're seeing in our city right now is we've got good momentum. We're growing economically like we have not in quite some time. We're changing our economic development strategy. Kind of a secret that I would call it a secret because we didn't realize it until about 3 years ago, and I would have thought there would have been much more discussion about this as a city. But we kind of torture the data and look at it all kinds of different ways. We have a challenge as a city that for the last 30 years, our median wage has been declining to the national average, and we've leveled out the last couple years. Why is that happening? Well, because you used to be able to work at Brown and Williamson or International Harvester. This would be, you know, our parents. And then you could make, in today's terms, let's say $45,000 to $60,000 a year. So you were making like 50 to 70% more than the median wage, and you were retiring with a pension. We know some of these folks in the community. Well, as those folks moved out of town because they didn't find our environment welcoming to them here, our median wage starts going like this. So while manufacturing was the bread and butter of the country back in the day, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that has changed. Our economy did not change with it. So when you hear us talking about our economic development cluster strategy around advanced manufacturing and lifelong wellness and aging care and several other clusters, and focusing on advanced innovation, all of that strategy is around getting the median wage to go back up. These industries focus on innovation and globalization, and those jobs pay more than the median wage. So our work with JCPS around intentional career pathing is an example of that. The city offering free software coding training with Code Louisville is an example. The free training that we offer around Louisville Cells is an example. The free training to get your Certified Production Technologist certificate is another example of that, where we're trying to specifically change behavior to go into these certain fields so that we can be returning to a higher than median wage, because that's what people want to live, right? So it's kind of this virtuous cycle, but that does take time. So you're seeing a change in the overall economic development strategy. So if you're from West Louisville, you've got to say, where can I fit into that? How does that affect me? How do I go on to JCTC? How do I get an on-ramp to Simmons College? Simmons College is a nice exclamation point with a change for our community over the last couple of years. They were certified, most people don't realize the significance of this, as a HBCU in the last 9 months, historically black college or university. That then allows them to have access to federal funds that will help the campus, help people with their tuition, so that we can grow and have more graduates at Simmons as well. So it's education, it's strategy, it's built environment as well, so people can see what's going on. But the number one thing we need is population growth of educated people, okay? Unemployment right now is around 4.9, 4.8%. And companies are dying to hire people that have skills. We need that just for economic growth, but when you look at the footprint of our city, and you look at all of our infill opportunities, we could put an additional 200 to 250,000 people just in the open footprints that our community has. Think about West Louisville. We have roughly 7,000 vacant and abandoned properties. You know, so you put 4 person per structure, that's 28,000 people right there. So how do you attract people to move to your city? And then how do you grow the skills of the people within your city? So we need more population.
Some people will say that you take a community like West Louisville, and it poses an opportunity, but an opportunity for whom? Who's going to ultimately benefit? Because you're going to have a mixed bag of income. You're going to have some spots where the income is out of reach for people who live there now. You just spoke of the medium income in the West, for instance. There's that process of gentrification where you bring in something that's very good and very positive for a community, but those people who live there can't reach it. I mean, how do these people get included in this vision? Do they get displaced? Do we build a formula to make sure that they're benefited in the process? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, what we're seeing around the country right now, there's a lot of evidence that, you know, gentrification kind of lifts all boats. But what's important is we go into a period of more growth, I hope, frankly, is that you take a look and say somebody owns property on Jefferson Street or Market Street, wherever it might be, and this is where the state can help and the city's involved as well, is we freeze their property taxes, let's say for 20 years. Some amount that says you're not going to be moved out of this neighborhood because it's unaffordable for you to live here anymore. So we have to be smart about that. Now, frankly, we're a long way from that problem. Okay, so when we start having problems about gentrification taking place in our community, that will be a cause for concern and proactive, but will also be a reason to celebrate that we're growing and our incomes are growing.
Let me interject this. I think, you know, and some commentators would say that although that whole process, as you see it, is a long way off, that the seeds are already being sown now and that it's on track to happen unless there is some intentional intervention in terms of policy with respect to that. So isn't now the time to deal with the question?
Absolutely. No, it is not too late. We have a lot of conversations about that on our team. And that's something we can work on in the interim as well. But we want to be smart about that because people are fearful. And look, in a lot of cases, these are families from multiple generations that haven't gotten a break for like 100 years. Okay, so we don't need to create any kind of fear in the community that you're going to be a victim once again. So that's a smart thing to do.
You know, one model that was encouraging was like the Hope 6 grants, where they had the mixed incomes. It was built into the formula, so you knew what the outcome. I think the choice neighborhood piece has some elements of, because of the federal connection and requirements there. I'm just wondering, these are all driven from the federal level, quite frankly. I wonder if there's something that you could do, or let's say a city could do, in terms of making sure we have formulas as we begin to develop, even in the West, that will make sure that we have the people in that community, at least a reasonable amount of the people in that community, benefiting from these things that we're talking about that we all want.
Right, no, absolutely. So when you think about affordable housing, for instance, we can just say we think affordable housing is good, okay? Well, I think affordable housing is good in every Metro Council district of the city. Okay, so there's developers' incentives then to put affordable housing in part of your unit. Why is that important? Well, right now, a lot of the cities that are east of the Mississippi River still have overly segregated housing patterns. And what we see when housing is more integrated, we see it kind of lifts everybody up. Let's take our, kind of our manifestation of it locally is what? Busing. Okay, so if our neighborhoods had a balance of diversity, we wouldn't need to bus. But our city's not that way. So the more we can work longer term toward more integration in the community in terms of housing stock, housing types, to me, that is a healthy thing for our city. And you saw the Metro Council within the last year, I believe it was, Sherry, that passed some ordinances relative to that. That's a good thing for our community.
Some people are also saying that as we've already indicated, there's a concentration of poverty in various sectors of our community, in the West included, that if you continue some of the policies that we have, I'm not talking about you, I'm just talking about generally speaking, and I'm talking about the state as well, that we reinforce the concentration of poverty. And I know there's some limitations on that. For instance, the abandoned housing situation, the ability to acquire property so you can do various types of development is very difficult to do. That's one of the challenges, I would imagine, right? So the question is, how do you, or can we, or how do you see us approaching a situation where we have a concentration of poverty in our communities? It is happening. Would you agree?
Well, absolutely it is. I mean, and all the stats show that to you. On this example of vacant and abandoned properties, it's probably been the #1 issue in terms of resources that we've spent as an administration to get it under control, get state laws changed with your help. You know that. So Kentucky's a very strong owner's property rights state. So in order for us, the government, which I hate saying that, again, I'm a business person, but in order for the government to have the power to move in and take possession of a property, there's huge limitations that we have and boundaries to do that. Now, working with the State House and the State Senate over the last 4 years, coming out of this session, I hope, we will now have had a total of 6 laws changed. Is that right, Gina? That allow us now the ability to more purposely move on a vacant and abandoned property so that it can be put to beneficial use. So our hands have been tied for a long time on this. So this land bank legislation and some other areas that we've been working on give us more flexibility, because taking care of vacant and abandoned properties is really expensive. We had about 10,000 calls for service that we initiated, most of them, last year in terms of taking care of vacant and abandoned properties. It cost about $2.5 million of our money here. Now, we have liens on properties and such that we've been able to get the laws changed, so when that property moves, all those liens are paid back first. What used to happen was the financial institutions got all of their money first, and then we, the people, the government, were at the back of the train. Guess how much money we got back? Zip. All right, so we were able to change that with the help of Frankfurt. So the tools are coming into place now. Our our foreclosure process is now up about 50% over last year, so you're starting to see movement, but it's still a big problem.
What's really good about this exchange here is it really demonstrates how the state and the city can operate together and has operated together in many respects. One of the things that concerns people also in the West, and I guess across the city, and I know you worry about and I worry about as well, is how do we create an environment that helps our small business development, the economic development side. We talk about the big companies coming in and creating the jobs and this sort of thing, but even those situations only allow certain people who are, in many instances, undertrained to take low-level jobs. How do we inspire entrepreneurship and small business development, and in this instance, in the West?
So you've got to have the capacity. Do you have a business that people want to shop at, #1? And will people buy and shop local? So it's up to us, in large part, to be able to do that. A good example of that is the First Choice grocery store that was put in over by Park Duval.
Wilson.
On Wilson, you know, and that's got the most beautiful produce section in town, in my opinion. You know, so anybody can go shop there. Okay. Now, fortunately, the neighborhood, as they understood it, the importance of it being there, have really supported it in a good way. So it's a high-quality store that's getting support from the neighborhood. So we want to take a look at our hardware stores, dry cleaners, whatever it might be, so they're supported as well. I was at Ace Hardware yesterday at 28th, 26th, and Market Street as well. People coming in and out all the time there. He has a product and stuff that people want to buy, and he's doing a good job.
But how does the city, or does the city?
Yeah, we do. I'm getting there.
Okay, go ahead.
So I can talk a little bit too long. Yeah.
You're doing all right. Keep going.
No, so Louisville Forward is our economic development, real estate development, talent development part of our town. You heard from Scott Love earlier today. Does a great job representing us in large part of the West. But so we have programs through them, have programs through the Enterprise Corporation of GLI that are about increasing entrepreneurial capacity so people understand the basics of how to run a business. Last night I spoke at something called Launch It, which is a 10-week course for giving entrepreneurs the skills of learning, is there demand for their product, is there P&L, is there profitability for the company as well. So there's lots of things like that are available. And then the question is, do you have the capital? And then will there be enough demand? I mean, when most people ask me, why aren't there more businesses in West Louisville? The answer is obvious from an economic development perspective, right? Is companies don't think they can make money by putting their business there. And as soon as they do, companies will come there. So that gets back to that available income to spend, education, or incenting a business, like we did in the case of Walmart, so it makes sense for them financially to locate there.
But still, you're talking about the big businesses. You're talking about incenting the larger businesses. What about those? What about the indigenous growth of small business?
So capacity to be a good business person, number one, we just talked about that. Second would be availability to capital. So that comes through our Metco loan program and other type of programs that the city offers.
And I believe that's on one of the breakout sessions that we're going to have shortly with respect to that. One of the things that I think is really important is the, in terms of economic development, and some people don't even think about it sometimes, is the environment of a community. You know, whether people want to come into a particular location because of the environment. How's the city looking at that, or is that part of the?
That's a big part of it. Yeah. I mean, what do we all want? I mean, and sometimes people get mad at me when I talk about this, but it's essential because it's something that people immediately see. We want every neighborhood in the city to be clean and green. You know, so when you drive through, it's like, looks nice here. You know, both in terms of cleanliness, but also then in terms of the tree canopy, the shrubbery, et cetera. We're starting to learn, and we're launching the country's first ever project around this about the correlation between greenscape and cardiovascular disease. So if the area of town you live in is not very green, there's higher incidences of cardiovascular disease. We're working on that with the University of Louisville, and this is a groundbreaking project. The reason why we're so interested in the tree canopy of our city and the urban heat island effect is another example of the high cost of being poor. Some of the hottest areas in our city, one of them, let's take Parkland for instance, low tree canopy, can be 10 degrees hotter in Parkland in the summertime than it would be out in Prospect. And you got your little old air conditioner that's just trying to keep you cool, you know, while your energy rates and your energy bills go up. So all this ties into cooler city, better air quality, lower cost of health care, longer life. So when you hear me talking about trees, don't think I'm some kind of green liberal. What I'm talking about is your ability to live a longer, higher quality life. Mother Nature was pretty smart. And as we disrupt Mother Nature, she's talking to us. And it'd be good for us to listen to her. And it comes down to affecting each and every one of our healths.
You know, the more and more we talk about this, I know this, you know this, and probably everybody sitting around here knows this. This is a complex deal. This is not easy.
Well, it's not, but I guess we're going to run out of time, so I can close with something. It's
No, you can just keep right on talking.
Okay. Well, it is, but one of the things that we believe is and this isn't corny, this is true. There's no problem too big that citizenship can't solve. But citizenship means you got to get in the game. And how do you solve a big problem in the city? We solve it one person at a time. So if you're asking yourself, what can I do? If you are part of a company or know people that own a company, everybody should hire young people, especially young people that don't have a mom or dad that can call somewhere and get that kid a job. They should hire somebody in our Summer Works program. We had a decision to make on whether or not we were going to keep it because we ran out of federal money. We said we are absolutely going to keep it. We've gone from 200 to 2,500 kids having summer jobs. So we can help kids find summer jobs. Go to summerworks.org, and they get a paycheck this summer. So direct a young person towards summerworks.org. Ask your employers to bring people on board. I want the culture of our business community to be such that people say, Senator, how many people you got hired this summer? So that's one way. And then the other way is mentors. Our mentoring programs work. Rashad Abdul-Ramin is over there. Rashad, stand up so everybody knows who you are. Rashad runs our Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods. Our Right Turn program, we have 500 people in that. Our Re-Image program is for kids that have been involved with the law in some way. We have about 100 kids in that. 70% of them have jobs now. They're all back on their track to their GED because they have a mentor helping them along their way. So we need more people to step up and say, I'm going to get in this game. That's how we solve big problems, one citizen at a time.
Ladies and gentlemen, our mayor, Greg Fischer.